What's good, boys? Welcome back to another video. Today, we are going to be talking about 7 undervalued Dynasty veterans that you can buy on your Dynasty fantasy football teams. Guys that are going for much lower than they probably should be based on the production that they've been able to give you in previous seasons and what I project them to give you this year. We are at that time of the year where everybody is valuing youth. Obviously, your rookie drafts are right around the corners. People want picks. They want youth. They want all of the fresh new stuff on their Dynasty rosters. And so because of that, I think these players are being heavily discounted. And I think we can take advantage of that as some savvy Dynasty fantasy football managers and as some of these teams that are looking to make real championship pushes here in 2024. So we'll talk about these guys. But before we get into this video, you know what we got to do. We got to tuck those shirts in, boys. All right, so the first player we're going to be talking about today is going to be starting at that tight end position. We are going to be talking about Dalton Shultz of the Houston Texans. And when we look at where Dalton Shultz is being valued right now in your Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues, we're going to go check Keep Trade Cut. That is consensus community-based rankings. It's kind of a voting system. It shows you a glimpse to where the community might be valuing this player. When we look at Keep Trade Cut right now, he is currently being valued as the tight end 16 in Dynasty Fantasy Football. And he's being valued in a tier here with Cole Kmet, Michael Mayer, Evan Engram. Those are some of the guys above him. And then you have kind of in this same tier as him, Pat Freiermuth, Luke Musgrave, Isaiah Likely. I think there's a lot of value to have in this tier when you're looking at Dalton Shultz. And even when we go look at where he's being drafted in startups right now, we're going to look at South Harmon's ADP. These are from real sleeper drafts, so that's where we're collecting the data from. He is coming off of the board in these startups as the tight end 16 as well. So right now, 15 other tight ends going above him. He averaged 10 fantasy points per game last year for the Houston Texans. That was the 11th best in fantasy football at the tight end position. Years before that, I know he wasn't necessarily in Houston, but 9.5, that was 9th best in the NFL, and 12.3, 5th best in the NFL. So for 3 years now, Dalton Shultz has been giving us top 11 numbers at the tight end position. And right now we're valuing him as tight end 16. It doesn't make a lot of sense. You even look at what he was able to do and what he was able to secure here this offseason. He got a 3-year, $36 million contract extension from the Houston Texans. I think this is a very good thing for Dalton Shultz. And what this does for me as a guy who wants to get Dalton Shultz on my rosters, the pairing with CJ Stroud, it's legit. It's an offense that's going to give him some low-end tight end 1 appeal, at least for the next 2 seasons. You're getting him very cheap right now. When we look at some of the trade value that is going to be equal to what Dalton Shultz is being valued at right now as far as picks go, you see it on the screen. The 210 right now is supposedly equal to what Dalton Shultz is. If I can give up the 210 right now in a Dynasty Fantasy Football League and get a guy like Dalton Shultz, who I know is going to give me low-end tight end 1 production for the foreseeable future, seems like a pretty safe bet to make, especially as a contender. We know the hit rates on those late second-round picks are virtually slim to none. Yes, we've had good guys be picked there in the past, but right now, if you're a contending roster, why don't you just take the sure thing in Dalton Shultz? And I would be setting that 210 for him every time. Now, the second player on this list that we're going to be talking about is going to be James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals. And James Conner, I wouldn't typically be telling you guys to buy running backs at this point in the offseason. I think there is still some things to happen, but the value on James Conner is crazy right now. He's being drafted as the running back 34 in startup drafts right now. You see on the screen, he's kind of pinched in a tier of a bunch of backs. You got Zach Charbonnet, Nick Chubb, Jalen Warren, Austin Eckler, James Conner, and Braylon Allen. All of these guys are in the tier with James Conner. And I think if we look at this tier very critically, you can say that James Conner has been the most productive running back in this tier of guys and will probably be the most productive running back in this tier for the next year. Obviously, Nick Chubb is a little bit of an outlier here because he had the injury to his knee here in 2023. But James Conner as the running back 34 feels totally disrespectful in startups. And I know he's a little bit older. He's 28 years old right now. He's going to be 29 going into the NFL season. But the Arizona Cardinals have added nobody of relevance in free agency. DJ Dallas is the only guy that they've went out and got. Michael Carter's still on the roster. Amari Demercado's still on the roster. Maybe this is a team that can go ahead and draft a running back in the NFL draft. That would be something that would be interesting for that rookie's draft stock. But I do think that that really wouldn't necessarily affect James Conner for the 2024 season only. I think as long as he is healthy, as long as he is under contract right now, they're going to use him. They're going to lean on him there in Arizona. And then again, just going over to Keep Trade Cut, seeing some of the other running backs in this tier. Again, similar names, but Aaron Jones, Nick Chubb, Kendre Miller, Trey Benson, James Conner sitting right here above guys like Chase Brown, Devin Singletary, Keaton Mitchell. It makes no sense, absolutely zero sense, why Keaton Mitchell, Devin Singletary, and Chase Brown should be as valuable as James Conner is to you if you're a championship roster. This is a piece that is very, very cheap to acquire, and it's something that I'd be doing on all of my championship rosters that need a little bit of boost at the running back position. And really, when we look at what the cost would be to go get a guy like James Conner, right now you can trade the 212, yes, the last pick in your second round, the 24th rookie in this class, for James Conner. Those hit rates, we already talked about them. They're very low. Give me the guaranteed production in James Conner as a contending roster, because when you look at the fantasy points that he's been able to put together over the last couple of seasons here in Arizona, 15 and a half fantasy points last year. That was number 13 overall. 15.4 the year before, 9th overall, and 17.2 the year before, 7 overall. It has been good sledding for James Conner here in Arizona, and I expect that to continue for at least one more year. This is a very affordable buy if you need a running back 2 in your lineup for very cheap while you go ahead and push for a championship in 2024. Now, the third player on this list is going to be Amari Cooper, wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns. And Amari Cooper right now, 29 years old, going to be 30 years old heading into the 2024 season. This is a guy who has averaged 15.1 fantasy points per game last year, 17th best in the NFL at the wide receiver position. And the year before, 14 and a half fantasy points, 17th best overall again in that previous year. And these are years that Amari Cooper played without a healthy Deshaun Watson. Over the last 2 seasons, while Deshaun has been in Cleveland, he has not played more than 6 games in either of those years. So Amari Cooper is playing with virtually backups in each and every one of these seasons, and he's still giving us top 20 production at the wide receiver position from a points per game standpoint. And I look at where Amari Cooper is being valued right now by the community. Over on Keep Trade Cut, he is currently the wide receiver 35. There's guys in this tier like Hollywood Brown, obviously saw a bump because of the Kansas City stuff. Christian Kirk, I don't really have a gripe with either of those guys. There's players in this tier that haven't proven anything to us. Christian Watson, Terry McLaurin, Cooper Kupp, Calvin Ridley. Yes, there's some names in there, and I think those names probably have a little bit more buzz. The Calvin Ridleys, the Terry McLaurins, the Christian Watsons, they have some more buzz than Amari Cooper. We're probably a little bit more sick and tired of the name Amari Cooper. There's some name fatigue there with him. So I would say that he is more valuable than all of those guys. If I can flip them and get into an Amari Cooper as a contending roster, it just makes a ton of sense. And where it's even more crazy for Amari Cooper is you can get him in startups even later than where we're valuing him right now. We look at the startup ADP, he is pinched in a tier where he's being drafted as the wide receiver 42. Keep in mind, I said he was giving you top 17 production at the wide receiver position from a points per game standpoint. Wide receiver 42 off the board. Christian Watson still there. Chris Godwin, Keenan Allen. These are the names. I feel like Amari Cooper is such a value at this price. And we look at the price of acquisition for what it would cost to go get Amari Cooper on a contending roster. Right now, the 203 is what is looking like is a fair value for Amari Cooper, according to Keep Trade Cut. And that is a cost that I am okay to pay. You kind of got to pick your poison here because the 15th rookie on the board is probably more of like a Jonathan Brooks, Keon Coleman type of player. If you're a contending roster, would you rather go out with Keon Coleman this year or Amari Cooper? I would rather go out with Amari Cooper. I think he can give you top 20 numbers, and you can play him as a wide receiver 2 on your lineup, and you're not going to have to pay wide receiver 2 prices to go get him. Yes, some people are going to say that they added Jerry Jeudy, and so this should hurt Amari Cooper. I fully disagree with that. Amari Cooper is still going to be a target volume kind of guy. We saw Jerry Jeudy alongside guys like Courtland Sutton, and Courtland Sutton was still the number 1 wide receiver for fantasy football on the Denver Broncos. Newsflash, Amari Cooper is more talented than Courtland Sutton. Doesn't bother me at all. The only person this is going to hurt is Elijah Moore. So with that being said, Amari Cooper, the third buy on this list, and somebody I'm definitely targeting if I'm a contender. Now we're going to keep it moving. We're going on to the 4th player on this list. We're getting a little bit more expensive as far as buys go, but I promise all of these guys are still going to be undervalued. We're going to be talking about wide receiver Mike Evans for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And Mike Evans just signed a 2-year, $52 million extension with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They also locked up Baker Mayfield. So what we saw out of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year, they brought that core back. They're going to be running it back here in 2024. So it should be more of the same. The only change here is Dave Canales went as the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. So there is an offensive coordinator change, but it is still under the same head coach. So we don't expect too much to change, but that is something to keep in mind. But regardless of that, we look at what Mike Evans was able to do last year. He had his most receiving yards since 2018, This is also a guy who had his highest yards per reception since 2019. So one of the best years of his career from a fantasy points per game standpoint, all of those things. You look at the fantasy points per game, 16.6, 10th overall in the NFL. Mike Evans came in, he balled out with Baker Mayfield, and I think a lot of people didn't necessarily expect that because the narrative around Baker Mayfield was very negative. I look at where Mike Evans is currently being valued, and I think a lot of this is due to the age. We see the 30 years old age for Mike Evans, and it scares us. He's being valued in a tier right now with Jaden Reed, Brian Thomas Jr., Stefon Diggs, Devontae Adams, Hollywood Brown, Amari Cooper. A lot of this tier is actually probably very undervalued for me right now. We're going to talk about a couple more of these guys, to be honest. And where I am seeing this is if I can trade my Jaden Reed and go get a Mike Evans as a contender, I think it's something I'm considering. And even when we look at the startup value right now for Mike Evans, even a little bit later, coming off the board is wide receiver 33. He is being valued below Deebo Samuel, below Devontae Adams, and just above Troy Franklin. So that kind of puts it into perspective. So would you rather roll those dice and kind of gamble on a guy like Troy Franklin in your rookie drafts, or would you rather trade that pick and go get a guy like Mike Evans when you're trying to win a championship? I lean on the Mike Evans. And to be honest, that's probably not even what it is going to cost you to go in and get Mike Evans. I look at the acquisition cost for Mike Evans right now. It is checking out as a late 2025 first. So if you just won your championship, or maybe you were in second or third place, and you project to be the same type of team this year, one of those top contenders, I can give my first next year and go get Mike Evans to help bolster this team now. Makes a lot of sense to me. That's something that I'm doing if I am a contending roster, and that's why I think Mike Evans is still undervalued. Even though the tier of where he's being perceived doesn't feel like crazy undervalued, it does feel like the points per game that you will get at this type of cost. So buy me into Mike Evans right here as an undervalued veteran to keep adding to my championship teams. But that takes us to our fifth player, and that fifth player on the list is going to be Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. Now with Deebo Samuel, Deebo is currently 28 years old. He is coming off the board in startup drafts right now as the wide receiver 31. I look at some of the wide receivers in this tier. It is a similar tier to the Mike Evans, so if you didn't like the Mike Evans buy, this is the same type of tier and the same type of acquisition cost for Deebo Samuel. You got George Pickens, Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, Troy Franklin in this tier. And even when I look at some of the other positional values, to think that Tajay Spears is currently being valued in the same breath, in the same round as a guy like Deebo Samuel, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It feels like Deebo Samuel is being undervalued here. And the reason why he's being undervalued is because you look at the fantasy points per game that he was able to give us last year in this offense for the 49ers, 16.3 fantasy points per game. It was 12th overall from the wide receiver position. And I look across the landscape and I think, what has changed with the San Francisco 49ers? Nothing. Nothing has changed. We don't expect anything drastic to change. If anything, we've heard rumblings of maybe a Ayuk trade that kind of shut that down. But the reality is, if Ayuk leaves, that's going to only make it better for Deebo Samuel. We don't expect them to be in on a first round or even probably a second round wide receiver. So that means going into 2024, Deebo Samuel should see more of the same. And what I like a lot about Deebo Samuel is he's still produced, even though this was a crowded offense. And I look at the type of players being valued in the same tier as him on Keep Trade Cut. You got Jackson Smith and Jigba. Yes, a young name that has some hype, but he hasn't proven anything to us yet. George Pickens, kind of the same thing. Jaden Reed, flashed. Mike Evans, Brian Thomas Jr. And it seems like there's a lot of people grasping at that upside in that youth. They want to take a shot at that. They want to get the next best thing. And currently in this tier, the best thing right now is Deebo Samuel. If you're getting top 12 numbers out of the wide receiver position this low at wide receiver 28, just makes sense. He's undervalued, and it's a guy that I'm willing to go buy on my championship rosters. The acquisition cost, like we've talked about before, this is probably the second most expensive player that we're going to be talking about in the entire episode today. And what it's going to cost you is the 111 in your rookie draft right now. It does feel like maybe you feel like there's some hope for a guy back there. But even then, that back half of the first round, a deep class, everything like that, all of those good talking points, we're still gambling here. We're still rolling the dice. We don't know how these rookies are going to pan out, but we know how Deebo Samuel is going to play this year for our fantasy football team. At least have a better idea at that than we do with the rookies. This is something that I'd be willing to do if I'm a championship roster. Now, moving on to our sixth player, our second to last player, we are going to be talking about Stefon Diggs for the Buffalo Bills. And I'm not going to lie, this is one of my favorite buys on this entire list today. Yes, his age has passed that 30-year mark that a lot of people get scared of. They think 30 years old, we're out. We don't want to roster a guy like that anymore. I think that's a mistake with Stefon Diggs. And I think why a lot of people are so down on Stefon right now is he had a very rough end of the season for the Buffalo Bills this year. They had an offensive coordinator change there in the middle of the season. And then obviously it was a new offense in the back half. it just wasn't enough time for Stefon Diggs and that team as a whole to kind of transition into a new offense there in the back half. So they leaned on the run game heavy. The volume wasn't there for Stefon Diggs. The usage wasn't the same. And I think that's scaring a lot of people off. But despite that, I look at what Stefon Diggs was able to put together during the 2023 season. Still a guy who averaged 16.1 fantasy points per game. That was 13th best in the NFL. And now Gabe Davis, a unrestricted free agent, goes to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Obviously, they signed Curtis Samuel. We maybe even expect them to be in on a rookie wide receiver at some point in the draft. But this is still Stefon Diggs' team as long as he wants to be there. Do not get it twisted. Josh Allen and Stefon Diggs have been a duo that has gotten it done for your fantasy football teams for many, many years now. And we look at this tier at where Stefon Diggs is being valued on Keep Trade Cut. Again, this undervalued tier that I keep talking about today, the Mike Evans, the Stefon Diggs, the Amari Coopers, that is the tier that we're looking at. But then you got the players in there like Jaden Reed, Brian Thomas Jr., Devontae Adams, Christian Kirk, Hollywood Brown. I would go on record by saying I would take Stefon Diggs over pretty much every player on this list. The only one that I might have pause with is Brian Thomas Jr. But again, that gets into that. I think I could maybe gamble on the wide receiver in the rookie class, but we know we have a stud in Stefon Diggs. And then when we look at where he's going in startups, you see it's that same tier there with Jaden Reed, Brian Thomas, George Pickens, Deebo Samuel, Devontae Adams, Travis Kelce, some of these other guys in this tier as well. You tell me Josh Jacobs is going over Stefon Diggs in a startup right now. I'm sending Josh Jacobs for Stefon Diggs 100 times out of 100 times, and I'm praying that that gets accepted. I'm willing to add extra on top of Josh Jacobs to go get Stefon Diggs. He is that big of a game changer, and I think he's that undervalued in the community right now. And I say that because when you look at the cost of acquisition, what is it going to cost as far as draft capital to go make a trade for Stefon Diggs? Right now, it is checking out as the 201 is enough to go get you Stefon Diggs. That is ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous that I can spend a second round pick to go get Stefon Diggs on a championship roster. Give me Stefon Diggs all day long and let me use that to my advantage, running my way right into a championship and getting a ring in my Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues. That is what is going to happen if you're trading for Stefon Diggs, and that's why I'm so in on him as a buy right now, because the community has virtually written him off as a guy who is a has-been. I promise you, Stefon Diggs is not a has-been. This is a guy who still has juice in the tank, and this is a guy who is still going to be able to help you win a championship in your Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues, and that's why we're buying him, and that's why I feel so strongly about this buy. Like I said, one of my favorites, if not my favorite buy of this offseason right now. And now the last and final player that we're going to be talking about as a buy today is actually going to be at the quarterback position. We're going to be talking about Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys. And a lot of people see that 30 years old or higher threshold, and they really don't want the player anymore. So that is why I think a lot of people are getting down on Dak Prescott, because when we look at what he was able to do for us in 2023, seeing the numbers that he put together, 20.7 fantasy points per game, the fourth best in the NFL. I don't know why we would look at that and say, yeah, this guy should be coming off of the board as the quarterback 16 on Keep Trade Cut. Why does that make sense? Right now, he is in a tier where he is below Jaden Daniels, below Drake May, below Brock Purdy. And then you have Dak Prescott, Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins. I'll be honest here. On this list of players, we know Dak Prescott still has probably 4 to 6 years left in the tank of high-end production. If he's anywhere where Kirk Cousins is 36 years old, and we're still very excited about him. So I don't know why we're not excited about Dak Prescott at 30. I think Dak Prescott, for the cost of acquisition right now, even in your startup drafts, because in your startup drafts, he's going higher than he is on Keep Trade Cut. So sure, it's a little bit higher of a cost, but I still think it's a value, still in that tier with Trevor Lawrence, Dak Prescott, and Brock Purdy. I think there's still a real argument that when you look at the ages of Trevor Lawrence and Dak Prescott, obviously you want to lean towards the younger guy, but the on-field production that we've seen out of these two for the last couple of seasons, Dak Prescott has the edge on him. That is a player that if I can down tier from Trevor Lawrence into Dak Prescott plus, that's something that I'm definitely willing to do. We know Dak is most likely going to be getting an extension here in Dallas. We also know that CeeDee Lamb is most likely going to be getting an extension in Dallas. He has continued to do it, putting up top numbers in Dallas each and every year, outside of the year that he was dealing with the injury on his ankle. But other than that, Dak Prescott has been very good. And I look at the acquisition cost as far as only draft capital goes for Dak Prescott. And right now it's checking out as the 107 is what is able to get you Dak Prescott. It feels ridiculous. It feels like that shouldn't even be real. And if that is real, I'm buying in at that cost. I'm lost for words. I'm buying in at that cost. I don't even know, man. It's you got to buy in at that cost, because you're talking about Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Caleb Williams, all of these guys off the board. Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison off the board. We're talking about Brock Bowers, JJ McCarthy, and Rome Odunze or Dak Prescott in our super flex leagues. Make it make sense. Dak Prescott, top 5 numbers in 2023. I'm going to put that on my team at all times for that cost. Somebody else can take the pick. Somebody else can roll the dice on the rookie and see if they hit. That's fine. I know I'm getting 20 points per game out of my quarterback position with Dak Prescott in 2024. That's a guy that I want to buy on my championship rosters. And like I said, I'm going to let the league mate just roll the dice. I want Dak Prescott. He is a very undervalued buy at the quarterback position based on what we've seen him do in this Dallas offense with Mike McCarthy. And that's why I think you should be buying him on your championship teams as well. Now, that is all I have for you guys today. If you did enjoy the video, go ahead and do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, comment down below if you agree with any of these buys or maybe you disagree with them. Let me know which ones you disagree with and who you would be buying instead in the comments below. If you guys also like Dynasty Fantasy Football content, you want more fantasy football content from your boy, go check me out. I do my own content at the League FFB. You guys probably know that by now, but I'd love for you to come over and check it out and let me know that you came from the BDGE Dynasty channel. But with those things being said, guys, we'll see you on the next video. Until then, peace out.